Also, on the Revive boxes, when you leave with them, could you please make sure that you do fill in your name on your personal box and today's date as a date that you have received it. Out there, I will also have a fentanyl fact sheet. It goes over how fentanyl can be transmitted, safety precautions that you should take with fentanyl. The biggest one on there is that you should not be using hand sanitizer or bleach if you feel like you've been exposed to fentanyl. That does increase it opens your pores, which can increase your vulnerability to the fentanyl. Soap and water is the best thing to use for that. And then on there it does go over signs and symptoms of an overdose, so that if you start feeling some of those symptoms, just be aware and then go to the hospital immediately. But I do want to point out that it is very unlikely for you to be able to absorb a toxic amount of fentanyl through your skin. So it's not for us to be afraid of, but it is for us to be wise. And so in your Revive kit, you will be getting some gloves with that. If you ever have to administer Narcan, wear your gloves. We don't need to be afraid of it, but we just do need to be wise, because it is highly unlikely for you to be able to absorb a toxic level of fentanyl through your skin. All right, so first we're going to start here with a look at Virginia. This is the number of opioid overdose deaths for the state of Virginia, and you can see how that's trending there. Here it's listed for 2020 as 1,915 deaths. I do know for 2021, those numbers were a little over 2,200. And then for 2022, those numbers were a little bit over 2,100. A lot of people have talked about this already, but I do kind of want to point out a scale. Nationally, that scale looks like 2020 as 70,000 deaths due to opioid overdose. 2021, that looks like 107,000 deaths due to opioid overdose. And then 2022, 109,000 deaths due to opioid overdose. And they gave some even newer facts than that. And so from 2020, we've had a 35 to 40% increase in opioid overdose deaths in our nation in that short time frame. And that's important a little bit later when we come back in the presentation. So I do want to point out there is now a Good Samaritan law in the state of Virginia. Originally, if you had overdosed, or if you were with someone that had overdosed, you could receive charges for possession, paraphernalia, things like that. There were even times where they were charging the actual person who overdosed with possession of the drugs inside their body. And so people were not calling for help. They were allowing their friends to die because they were fearful of having legal repercussions for that. And so the state of Virginia did pass a law called the Good Samaritan Law, which does protect people in that situation. It gives them amnesty for any legal charges, the person with the opioid overdose, but also the people involved. So friends calling for their friend, family members calling for their family member, etc. There are two important parts of this law that you want to make sure that you're paying attention to, because if you do not follow these, I said two, there's three. If you do not follow these three parts, then you are not covered by the law. And so it is one, that such individual calls and asks for help in good faith, so they're not doing it with malicious intent. There's two, that the individual remains at the scene of the crime. And then number three, that the individual identifies themselves to law enforcement when they arrive. And so if you're ever sharing this with someone, you want to make sure that they understand they need to be calling in good faith, they need to be staying at the scene, and they need to be identifying themselves to law enforcement when they arrive. And if you ever do have to administer naloxone or Narcan in that situation, I too would make sure that you do those three things. You're trying to help someone out. You're doing a good deed, right? But just so that you make sure you check all of your boxes, if you ever have to call 911, you need to be calling in good faith. You need to be staying at the scene, and you need to be identifying yourself to law enforcement when law enforcement arrives. That doesn't matter if they stay or if they don't. You encourage them to stay. You let them know about this law protecting them. But you do not force them to stay. But you stay and you check those 3 boxes no matter if they leave or not. There was previously a standing order for naloxone. It has now been passed to an over-the-counter drug. So what that means is you can go get it like Sudafed. It is a flat rate, so you can no longer use your health insurance to pay for it, but I think it's $40 to $45, but it is there for you to get at any time, but that is a flat fee. If you notice here, the 2 in the middle, it is available to you though at no charge at your local health department and through a CSB, which is what I work for. We do not give out Narcan. You can't call us and get Narcan. We give it out whenever we do trainings like this, so everyone should be contacting your local health department if your Narcan expires, if you just need some, if you use it and you need some. Contact your local health department to be able to get that Narcan for yourself. Look at the bottom in red. It is important though, a nurse does have to be on duty at the time for them to be able to give that Narcan to you. So just call ahead and make sure one's there. They might have stepped out for the day, they might have be somewhere else, and so to save yourself a trip, just call ahead, make sure a nurse is there so that you can get that Narcan when you arrive. All right, so understanding addiction. Everybody take a moment and look at the definition of addiction there at the bottom. And so addiction refers to substance use disorders at the severe end of the spectrum and is characterized by a person's inability to control the impulse to use drugs even when there are negative consequences. And so the way that I like to explain this is kind of like a threshold or a line in the sand. There are people who over here who can casually use substances. They can put them down, pick them up whenever they want, right? We all may be people like that with alcohol or things like that. We can casually use them or not use them at our choice, right? But there is this line in the sand, this threshold that people who are casually able to control their use cross over, and when they cross over that line or that threshold, they enter into addiction. And so no longer do they have the ability to choose whether or not they are using a substance or not, no matter what the consequences are. So even if they're having negative consequences of using these substances, once they've crossed that threshold, there's no going back. So once they've crossed, they have lost the ability to control the impulse to use, no matter the negative consequences. Why else are 109,000 people every year risking their lives and dying due to opioid overdose? Why else do people lose their children, spend a lifetime of incarceration? Because they've crossed this line from they've gone from casual use and they've crossed the line into addiction, and they are no longer able to choose whether they use or not. So here's a video that's going to show you what addiction looks like. Just take a moment and observe and note the surrounding and everything.
Mhm.